You know, for as long as most of us can remember, computer memory followed this one simple, beautiful rule. It just always got cheaper. Every single year, you could get more for less. But what if I told you that 40-year-old rule has just been broken? We are entering a completely new era, a structural supercycle for memory. And in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly why this time is different.
Okay, so what's going on here? The whole story really, it all comes down to this collision of three massive forces. First, you've got the hard limits of physics. Second, the brutal economics of finance. And finally, this new, totally insatiable, and just fundamentally different kind of demand that's coming from AI.
So look, the most important thing to grasp is that we have completely shifted from an old era to a new one. We've gone from the predictable progress of Moore's law to literally hitting a physics wall. We've moved from a market with like 20+ competitors down to a super disciplined group of just 3. And that means that classic boom and bust cycle, it's being replaced by what looks like a structural, long-term supercycle.
All right, so to really get why this is such a big deal, we got to go back and appreciate just how good we had it for so long. Let's take a look at the engine of cheap memory that powered the tech industry for like 40 years and see exactly why it sputtered to a halt.
And wow, this chart right here, it just perfectly captures that golden age. Just look at it. From the 1970s all the way onward, the cost per gigabyte of memory was in an absolute free fall. This predictable deflationary force is what made everything from PCs to smartphones to the cloud possible. I mean, this was the bedrock assumption for the entire tech world.
But yeah, that era is over. And what's really interesting here is you can see the problem from 2 different angles. The top chart, it shows the physical shrinking of memory cells, that's the green line, has totally flattened out. And the bottom chart shows the direct result of that. The cost per gigabyte just stopped falling around 2012 and has pretty much been moving sideways ever since. The free lunch, folks, is officially over.
So why? Why did it stall? Well, that brings us to our first major force. And this isn't about a lack of trying or some failure of innovation. Nope. We are literally hitting a wall of physics.
Okay, this is a really great way to get your head around the problem. Think of a memory cell, right? Just one single bit of data as a tiny little bucket holding an electrical charge. For decades, we just kept making the buckets smaller and smaller. But now that bucket has become more like a tiny drinking straw with this insane 100-to-1 aspect ratio. And it's only holding a few tens of thousands of electrons.
And that, as you can imagine, leads to this incredible engineering challenge. The signal coming from that tiny straw is so faint, so delicate, it's almost lost in the background noise. I mean, get this. A single speck of dust can carry 10,000 times more static charge than one of these modern memory cells. Think about that little static shock you get from a doorknob. That involves billions of electrons. We are literally fighting the laws of physics just to read a simple 1 or a 0.
So what does all this physics stuff boil down to? Well, it comes down to one really staggering number, 50x. See, back in the golden age, DRAM density would increase 100-fold in about a decade. In the last decade, it's only increased by 2-fold. Our ability to squeeze more supply out of new technology has just collapsed. It's down to 1/50th of what it used to be.
But look, physics is only half the story here. The other half, it's all about the money. So let's move on and see how decades of these brutal, cyclical market battles have created what's basically a $20 billion fortress around the entire industry.
I mean, the barrier to entry is it's astronomical. Back in 1995, you could build a brand new memory factory, a fab, for under $1 billion. Today, a single leading-edge fab is going to set you back an estimated $20 billion. There's no startup on Earth that can afford that. The supply is basically locked in with the players who are already in the game.
So this intense cost pressure has acted like a great filter, you know? The industry has consolidated from over 20 companies back in the 90s all the way down to just 3 giants today: Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. All those old boom and bust cycles, they just killed off the weaker players, like Qimonda back in 2009 and Elpida in 2012. The ones who survived are tough, they're financially robust, and they are very, very disciplined.
And this market structure has a name, right? It's an oligopoly. When you only have 3 major players left standing, they can manage supply with a kind of discipline that was just impossible in the past. They can avoid that reckless overbuilding that used to send prices crashing down. And look, this isn't some backroom conspiracy. It's just rational economic behavior when you're in a consolidated market.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got physical limits stopping supply from growing fast, and we've got a financial fortress that keeps new suppliers out. Now, let's add the final and most explosive ingredient to the mix: AI's new, insatiable, and fundamentally different hunger for memory.
Okay, this right here is probably the most crucial point to understand about AI demand. It is cannibalistic. The specialized memory that AI uses, it's called high bandwidth memory, or HBM. Well, the chips for it are physically much larger than standard DRAM chips. So when a factory switches a production line over to making HBM, that same silicon wafer produces way fewer total chips. And that directly cuts down the available supply for everything else, for your phone, for your PC, for your servers.
So yeah, the takeaway is that AI demand is actually subtractive to the rest of the market. This is so important. AI isn't just another customer getting in line to buy memory. Its demand actively shrinks the total pie available for everyone else. And that tightens the whole market and pushes up prices for every single type of memory.
All right, let's bring it all home. What happens when you collide the hard wall of physics, the $20 billion fortress of finance, and the cannibalistic hunger of AI? You get a completely new economic reality. So, welcome to the higher for longer era of memory.
You know, in the old days, when prices went up, companies would just race to build new factories, and a flood of new supply would come online and crash prices again. That playbook, it's dead. Supply can no longer sprint to meet demand. Ramping up a new process takes years, not a few months. Supply can now only crawl.
And this just perfectly illustrates the result of all that. You've got that top line, which is the projected AI-driven demand just soaring upwards. And then you have the bottom line, which is our constrained supply just crawling along. That gap between them, that red wedge, that's a structural deficit. The jaws of supply and demand are opening wider and wider, creating a seller's market that looks like it's going to last for at least the next 3 to 4 years. So, yeah, the verdict is in. We have definitively left the old era of crazy scaling, 20-plus players, and those wild boom and bust cycles. We are now firmly in a new era defined by physical limits, a 3-player oligopoly, and a structural supercycle. Let me be clear. This is not a temporary price spike. This is the new economic reality. So what does this actually mean for everyone? For businesses, for consumers? Well, first, you have to secure your supply. Things like long-term agreements are now absolutely essential. Second, you gotta redefine your costs. You need to start budgeting for structurally higher memory prices, because those huge price drops of the past, they aren't coming back. And finally, keep an eye on capital expenditures. Unless you see a massive spike in investment from the big three, there's just no price relief on the horizon. And all of this leaves us with one final, really provocative question to think about. In a world where memory is no longer a cheap, abundant commodity, but instead a scarce and high-value resource, who are going to be the biggest winners, and who will be the biggest losers of this AI revolution?